Yo dudes, it's been a while, isn't it? Hope you've all been well. Sorry for the lack of content. I've had a bit of a rough start to the year, but I'm back and we've got a rather interesting little surprise video for you today. So, a good friend of mine and bandmate made a rather special purchase recently. And I say special because it's something we've both been wanting to try for quite some time now. And that is a Solar guitar. More specifically, the Solar A2.6W. Now I know most of you watching will probably know a certain amount about these guitars already, but for the sake of the video and for newcomers, I'll just do a quick rundown of what I think are the most important specs and what I think people are going to look for in a guitar. Then I'll do a few tone demos and maybe talk in a bit more detail about some specific features that this model has to offer. Of course, it wouldn't be an honest review if I didn't at least try to find some things I don't like about it, but if there's anything, and that's a big if, then I think it's probably going to come more down to personal preference at the end of the day, but we'll have to see, won't we? So without any further ado, let's jump straight in. So from head to toe, we have an inline headstock with Solar machine heads, as well as a rather snazzy little Solar logo on the truss rod cover, a graphite top nut, 24 super jumbo nickel frets on a really tasty looking ebony fretboard, with the only inlay on the face of the board being the usual Solar logo on the 12th fret and mother of pearl. The side inlays are there as well, of course, if you're inlay retarded like myself and can't navigate the fretboard for without help. That's always handy. As for the back of the neck, there's something I really like about this C-shaped maple neck and what I think pretty much all Solars have right now, and that's the baby cheek smooth satin finish on the back. Now onto the body, we've got a solid chunk of mahogany with something I'm actually not all too familiar with, and that's a set through neck construction. Pickups are two Duncan Solar passive humbuckers. You've got a 5-way toggle switch for them with the common single volume, single tone knob control layout, which definitely pleases the Ibanez fanboy in me. The scale length is 25.5 inches and this specific model comes with a basic string through hardtail bridge. So I think that just about covers most of the main specs, but if you want the full list on this model, then check the description and you'll find a link to the Solar Guitars website. So for the demos, I wanted to keep the rig as simple and as realistic as possible. So I decided to use my Laney IRT Studio running at 15 watts. I used my MXR Wylde Overdrive in front of the amp just to add a little bit more gain and tighten things up. Obviously for any cleans I'll just be using the amp's clean channel. This will all be mic'd up using my Shure SM57 in front of a V30 speaker. One thing I really love about these guitars is the recessed control knobs and where they're positioned on the body as well. That's really important for me. Right, I'm an Ibanez fanboy, especially for the older models, but there's one thing that annoys the living shit out of me, and that is having the volume knob right next to the pickup. Like I'm not one of these players who can tuck my fingers in when I pick. It just feels completely wrong to me, so I just don't do it. So if my pinky even so much as lightly caresses the volume knob, then that knob's coming straight off. No questions, it's just gone. So having these where they are just gives much more freedom of movement for picking without having them too far out of reach. It's just Now let's talk about the neck and how this thing feels to play. Feel is probably the most important thing for me with any guitar. So even though I can't tell you if you will or won't like a certain guitar, I thought I'd try something a little different and show some silent comparisons of the Solar against a few of my other guitars that have similar and also not so similar profiles to them. Oh, by the way, the Solar is still set up exactly the way it came out of the factory. The owner hasn't done a thing to it, and he specifically told me not to touch the action either. I have no idea if this is going to help anyone, and yes, the shots are slightly blurry, but since my camera couldn't focus on the entire width of each neck being zoomed all the way in, I made sure that the very back of each neck was in focus to give you a better idea of the thickness. So the Les Paul has a painted and finished neck, but even though the Dean would usually be about the same thickness and have a similar feel to it, I've actually refretted this guitar, which means it's had a tiny bit of the fretboard taken off, and also the finish was pretty damn thick to say the least. So it does feel slightly better than the Les Paul, at least to me anyway. Now on the second bunch here, the Warrior's neck I think is from a Japanese made dinky. It did have a fairly thin clear coat, which I also removed, and I did ever so slightly reshape it to give it a bit more of a D-shaped feel, but it's still definitely closer to its original C profile, so that's hardly going to be noticeable here. And speaking of D-shapes, the two Ibanez Wizard 1 profile necks are my all-time favourite necks to play, probably because I have baby hands, so it's just easier to move around on. But I wanted to include them because of the obvious difference in thickness, and I actually know plenty of people who don't like really thin necks. I know these picks definitely aren't perfect, and they aren't all in the exact same angle either, but I'd say from my personal experience of them all, the Solar is closer to the Dean and Jackson in terms of feel. Also taking into consideration that it's painted, so I'd actually go as far as to say that it's the nicest feeling painted neck that I've ever played. Now while we're on the subject of necks, let's talk a little bit about this set through neck design, then we'll go into another demo. Obviously the name sounds like a combination of neck through and set neck, and I think from what I've read it's basically a set neck but with a deeper pocket, as it doesn't go all the way through to the end of the body, but it still goes further than your standard set neck would. Of course, if I'm wrong with any of that, feel free to enlighten me in the comments. So I guess I should talk about some of the cons then. In all honesty, I didn't really find any. There was only a couple of things which are more cosmetic, I guess. They don't affect playability or tone or anything like that. One is on the pickup selector, where the hole's been cut, it's a little bit rough around the edges. There's kind of a sawtoothy kind of feel, but that's just, it's not been smoothed out inside. There's a little bit of bit of specks of black paint there as well, but that's, again, you're not going to see this, it doesn't affect anything else. The next thing was the fretwork, and it's not, again, not on the tops of the frets. They're fine, everything's great, it feels fantastic. Fret ends are all smooth. The only thing is the consistency of the bevel across the length of the board on both sides. I couldn't really show you on the camera, but it kind of dips in slightly and then comes up again at the ends, but it's so minor, it's not even really noticeable, and you definitely don't notice it when you're playing. Like I said, these things are only if you are really trying to be extremely anal about every little detail on a guitar. To me, unless you're spending like thousands, like a lot of money on a guitar, that's not something that you really should be doing or thinking about, because especially if it doesn't affect playability or tone, it's just, there's no point to it. That being said, for what you're paying for this, it's fantastic. There's little to pick up on. Neck's pretty much dead straight. The action isn't as low as I'd normally like, but from the factory you don't want to set it up too low or too high. You just want to have it set up really where everyone's happy to play it and it just feels good, and this does just that. Oh, also one thing I haven't talked about yet is the weight of this. I know it hasn't got a Floyd Rose or a floating trem, but it's probably one of the lightest guitars of this type and for a mahogany body that I've ever held. It's pretty much perfectly balanced when you're stood up with a strap too. Right then, what's my final verdict? Overall, I think these are great guitars. Some people might be put off by the price, especially considering they're not a massively established brand, but you definitely get what you pay for. Also, I feel comfort in the fact that they're all made in the same factory, so I know what to expect quality wise and don't have to worry about what country a guitar is made in to determine whether it's worth it or not. With Solar, you know you're going to get what you pay for no matter which guitar you buy, and the only difference is going to be in the specs really. You can buy a Solar from either Thomann or directly from Solar Guitars website itself, where I think they even ship outside of Europe too. So if you feel like you want to pick one up, head over to either website. If you enjoyed or didn't enjoy this video, let me know in the comments. Also, if you have a Solar yourself or you know someone with one, let me know what your opinion is on them, and I'll see you in the next video, whenever that is.